Well, we got to talk about a mid-cycle slowdown slash recession. And is it possible? Is it possible that we could actually be facing a type of slowdown that isn't that bad? And the answer to that is, well, what we're going to talk about in this particular video. And in my opinion, it's actually quite remarkable. So there's this argument that perhaps, just maybe, 1995 is 2023 basically today. And so what does that mean? Well, in 1995, we had what was known as a mid-cycle slowdown. See, we came out of this 89 recession, which really didn't take hold until 1990. So we had a crash in 89. We got the recession, the official recession designation, in August of 1990. The recession technically was over by March of 1991. Now, what's really interesting about this is it was, an 8-month-long recession. So you had your crash in 89, your official recession about a year later in August of 90. The recession ended in March of 91. And guess when unemployment peaked? 15 months after the recession. Well, after the recession started. Well, that's pretty remarkable because the recession started in August of 90. But it wasn't until June of 92 that you ended up getting to 7.8% unemployment, which is pretty remarkable. That's a pretty high level of unemployment. And so a lot of people believed that, okay, well, if unemployment can take that long to peak, then obviously unemployment is a lagging indicator. And that is absolutely true. We know that. Unemployment is a vastly lagging indicator. One of the things that we also know today is that there really hasn't been an official recession without the unemployment rate skyrocketing. Like when you look at the St. Louis Fed and you look at the charts on the unemployment rate, every time it ticks up and hockey sticks up, you have a recession. Now, that's interesting, but it has nothing to do with the mid-cycle sort of slowdown other than the fact that it was relatively close to when you last had a recession. So think about that. You had the crash in 89, and then you had a recession in 90 to 91. Okay, great. So then you started going into recovery mode. And in recovery mode, you actually started seeing the stock market start doing quite well. And not only did it do quite well, it started doing very well, specifically starting in 1995. And if you look up the S&P 500 and you look up a 90-year history on a logarithmic pattern or whatever, you'll really see what we're talking about. But in 95, you started seeing a skyrocketing of the stock market going all the way into the 2000s era. And then, of course, you had the dot-com crash and some nightmares over here. But what was really remarkable was the conditions of 95 that led to this stock market rally. And it's wild because think about how similar it sounded. You ready for this? I went to a 1996 New York Times article, and here's what they said. While there's talk of a possible recession, the conversation leans towards a mid-cycle slowdown rather than a full-blown recession, as indicators such as consumer sentiment and spending remain relatively strong. This is very interesting, mostly because what led to the mid-cycle slowdown in the mid-90s? Listen to these conditions. The Federal Reserve raised interest rates several times in the early 90s in an effort to control inflation. The dollar had also risen strongly after the 89 crash and 90 recession, making it expensive for American businesses to export goods and services. On top of that, you had a decline in business investment. Those three conditions are exactly the same three conditions that are going on right now. Literally, they're exactly the same things you're seeing right now. You have the rising interest rate environment. Not only do you have the rising interest rate environment, but you have a dollar that has already substantially strengthened. And then on top of that, you're seeing this slowdown in business fixed investments, as well as just businesses overall being most likely to be affected by the credit crunch from the banking crisis. Which makes sense because when businesses take out loans, they usually don't take out a 30-year fix like a consumer does. They take out these revolving lines of credit that slowly adjust up in interest. And that's painful for businesses. It's actually more painful for businesses than it is painful for consumers. And then listen to this from the 1996 piece from the New York Times. What do they have to say? They have to say the U.S. economy grew at a meager annual pace of just 0.9% in the final 3 months of 1995. And guess what? You didn't end up having a recession, which that was the really exciting part, is that you could grow at 0.9%. I think for the year, GDP in 1995 was about 2.6% when they finally did the math on the full year. But what's wild here is you had GDP really slow under higher rates, a strong dollar, less business fixed investment. And this came after a recession just a few years before, which we had a 2020 recession, remember? And on top of that, you had the consumer spending levels start stabilizing. They didn't really fall off a cliff, but they started getting, quote, restrained. Also, you saw total output somewhere around the 2.1%, which was, quote, back then, the smallest gain since 1991, basically right around after that recession ended and you started coming out. You had the Clinton administration anticipating economic weakness might continue for another year ahead, but expected growth to rebound in the spring of 1996. Alan Greenspan, the chairperson of the Federal Reserve, described the economy as going through a significant soft patch, but predicted the higher likelihood of a rebound than a recession. Builders broke ground on new homes at a solid pace in January 1996, offsetting previous declines in December. That's literally the same thing that just happened this year, by the way. Same thing with housing starts. And then personal spending, while it climbed 0.8% in the fourth quarter in 1995, it was substantially slower than that 2.8% climb they saw in the summer before that. So you saw businesses really slow down, consumers slow down a good amount, but you didn't end up going into recession. For the entire year, you ended up rising with a GDP level of somewhere around 2.63%, and you avoided a recession. But when people look back at 1995, they're like, dude, 1995 was one hell of a soft patch in the economy, but it was a great year. Why was it a great year? Folks, look at the stock market. You ready for this? I'm going to show you a logarithmic chart of the S&P 500, and it's scary. Go back. Well, look for a moment. Where on this chart do you see the biggest skyrocketing? And this is a logarithmic chart. And look for the biggest skyrocketing outside the decade going into the pandemic. So in other words, ignore this part, which is the decade going into the pandemic. Where is the biggest rise in this logarithmic curve? Well, it's actually right here. And let's see where that begins. Ding! Oh, look at that. Right here. February of 1995. Your boy Kevin was 3 years old. Anyway, February of 1995. During the soft patch, during the mid-cycle slowdown, during everybody freaking out about there potentially being a recession after you already had the recession just a few years before that, during all of this freaking out, the stock market absolutely went ape. I mean, it went to higher levels than we saw until basically 2014 on on nominal levels here. Now, some say, well, of course, I mean, once you got to the late 90s, you had the dot-com era, which was just a massive period of excess and speculation. This is true. I mean, it all ended up in the poopy doopies over here, right? You ended up with double recession, dot-com recession and the Great Recession driven by housing. But the point is, if today we're at February or March of 1995, you got another 5 years, bro. And that's consistent with the nice Nike swoosh recovery, just saying. Now, it's not just me who's talking about this potential idea that today's cycle could be somewhat similar to 1995. It's actually Texas Instruments. This is where I was inspired by the idea, because I've always looked at, the Federal Reserve has regularly talked about this idea of a soft landing, and the soft landings that we've previously had have been far and few between. It's basically mid-80s, mid-90s. Those are your soft landings. And the mid-90s soft landing just happens to be somewhat eerily, scarily similar to some of the conditions, some of them, not everything, that we're seeing now. History doesn't repeat itself, but it tends to rhyme. And the chief executive officer of Texas Instruments was at a banking conference with the Citi conference. And I want to read you what he says. So he said the following. I know you're a historian in terms of keeping track of this stuff. To me, potentially, the cycle you may want to go back and look at is 1995 to 96. Because 2000 to 2001, the Y2K cycle emerged into a pretty weak personal electronics market. And so did the 2008 to 2009 cycle, which emerged into a pretty weak global economy because of, the real estate crisis. But between 1995 and 1996, you had, in the words of the CEO of Texas Instruments, quote, what turned out to be an 7 or 8 year secular run with the growth of PCs and cell phones. Well, it isn't going to be PCs and cell phones in this run. Guess what it's going to be? It's going to be industrial and automation because of semiconductor content. In other words, AI. Now, the Citi conference happened before, all this AI stuff was going crazy, and Kevin's like, hey, all right, well, let me show you as an entrepreneur or as an employee how to be more productive using AI via my course on building your wealth, link down below, how to make more money and get SH9T done faster. It's actually a free upgrade for existing members of that course. But we're going to be doing all the AI releases here on June 1st. I encourage you to join. We'll have another large price increase once June 1st rolls around. So check that out. You can bundle up with any of the programs linked down below. But listen to that quote for a moment. You had an 7 or 8 year run where from 95 to 96, the stock market blew up because of cell phones and PCs. Well, now we have these conditions in the market that are super similar to what we saw in 95. And the stock market's, just getting potentially started on its run. So it's actually a really exciting period to look back to, that maybe, just maybe, this is not going to be a recession. Maybe we had a technical recession. I mean, Q1, Q2 of 2022 was a recession, technically, right? We had negative GDP. But beyond that, it makes you wonder, is it possible that AI and productivity can swing us out of this? And then this is, of course, where people say, but Kevin, the consumer, they're going to roll over, right? This is what all the bears say. And I get it, because the bears are like, Kevin, okay, we agree, inflation is going to come down, but the consumer is going to roll over. Really? Where are the indications of that? Well, let's just analyze exactly that for a moment. Let's go press, let's see, I'm supposed to be able to press that button. It didn't work. Okay, hold on. I press that button. Here we go. Okay, so I press this button, and then I need to press this button, and then that button. Oh, that's not the right button. Oh dear. This is what happens when I bring back the Meet Kevin report, and it just hasn't been battle tested. It hasn't been battle tested, okay? You just have to bear with me here for a moment. One of these buttons is gonna put me in the right spot. Oh, this is terrible. Well, you know what? Whatever. You'll just have to deal with me where you'll have to deal with me. Yeah, I can't get it up, boys and girls. I can't get it up today. That's all right. We'll just go with Kevin right there. All right. So what do we have here? Look at this. America runs on consumer spending, and consumer spending continues to run. Oh, hold on. I'm in the weird corner. There we go. America runs on consumer spending, and consumer spending continues to run in the right direction, as this week's strong April sales report confirmed. Retail sales report. The strong start for consumer spending should support another moderate increase in GDP in the second quarter. In aggregate, the household sector is a net recipient of monetary interest, while non-financial business sectors are net payers of interest. As businesses gradually reset into higher interest expenses over time, this will be an added headwind. Okay, then they talk about how businesses are starting to reach a breaking point and how, last week 7 went bankrupt. This is a recent report, by the way. It's from May 19th. There we go. Oh, it's so weird being in the top left corner there. Anyway, May 19th. This is from when this JPM report's from. And what they're really telling you is, hey, look, businesses might be the ones who roll over. As we talked about earlier, it's businesses, just like in 1995, that started slowing down their investments because it was getting more expensive to do business because rates were going up. Not the consumers. The consumers didn't roll over in 1995 either. And yes, while some things slowed in 1995, we didn't actually go into a recession. And really, we're seeing similar things happening right now. In fact, look at this. First of all, they talk about the credit tightening and how the Fed's probably done this cycle. Okay, we talked about that earlier. But look at this. After a sluggish end to Q1, real consumer spending might be off to a good start with the April retail sales report. Even though retail sales growth was below expectations with a 0.4% increase in April, the sales of the control category rose 0.7%. So what is control? Well, control takes out the volatile gas segment, the volatile used autos and new autos segment. It takes out building materials and food services, which is like restaurants. Now, I understand that takes out a lot of stuff. What does it leave in there? Well, it leaves in there you getting your haircut, your CPA, your dentist, medical services, you buying groceries, you buying, not food services, right? You buying, I don't know, if I didn't already say, well, here, like tax prep services, financial services, courses on building your wealth, like all of those things are excluded, or are included, rather. The only things that are excluded, autos, gas, building materials, and food services. These are generally the volatile ones. And when you actually look at that segment, retail sales rose 0.7% in April of 2023. And what's it being driven by? You won't believe it. Online retailers. Dude, you know how long online retailers were a big sandbag? Well, for a very long time. They were a massive sandbag because everybody's like, oh my gosh, I'm done buying stuff online. I want to go out and spend money at an actual store again because, I'm so used to buying stuff online because of COVID. Well, now all of a sudden, online retailers are actually driving retail sales again. This is crazy. So, and then of course you could look at industrial production data coming in stronger than expected. There is a lot of noise in this. Some reports are strong, some reports are weak. You've got the New York and Philly Feds coming in strong. You had Empire State coming in a little bit soft. You had some other business surveys like ISM moving up, Institute for Supply Side Management. So a little bit of mixed data here, but when you're actually looking at manufacturing output, it seems like you're seeing at least somewhat of an inflection point up in April, which is just weird because I think most of the bear argument is that, inflation will go down, but the Fed will have squeezed us into an earnings recession because people are going to stop spending. But that's just not what we're seeing in the data right now. Not only is manufacturing data ticking up again after the banking crisis, but consumer spending is ticking up again. Like the second quarter is starting to look just fine. And it's scary to some extent because it's like, there's no way Jerome Powell could really pull this off, is there? I mean, there's no way he could pull off this soft landing. It has happened before. It is very rare. And, I'm not here to be like a J-Pow shill. I mean, we know they've been wrong in the past here pretty significantly. But it's kind of remarkable to think that, wow, that's weird, Kevin. Maybe this could potentially be like 1995. Now, I'm not saying with certainty that's what I think it is. I still believe in my volatile Nike swoosh, which we've been talking about for like 6 months. Sorry to sound like a broken record. But, I mean, I was blown away yesterday when I looked at the S&P 500 over the last, 90 years or whatever on a log curve. And I'm like, well, what did it do in 95? And I look and see it skyrocket. I almost lost it. I'm like, oh my gosh. Near soft landing in 95, and the stock market skyrockets, which we kind of started setting the foundations for in the last 5 months. And the market's done very, very well. And if you look at the Atlanta Fed's real GDP nowcast, which is basically this forecast of what GDP is going to be for the second quarter, it's rising. They keep revising it up. First, they thought it was going to be 1.9%. They thought it was going to be 1.9% just 3 weeks ago. Then they raised it to 2.7%. Then they raised it to where it is now at 2.9%. That's almost 3% growth. That's for the entire United States right now. We're projecting Q2 to be on pace for almost 3% growth. That's wild. I mean, that's knocking on the door of what we saw in 95 when we had 2.63% growth for the entire year. So I know everybody's talking about the recession's coming in Q3, Q4. Everybody's going to suddenly magically run out of money and stop spending. And it's possible. I mean, businesses could roll over. Maybe consumers don't have to. It could be businesses that roll over. I actually think this piece by JPM was pretty reasonable where they suggest, hey, man, if we do roll over on the business side, maybe that's all you need to go into recession. But this is just not as bad as thought. So pretty remarkable. Pretty remarkable. So anyway, let's see. Let's take a quick look at some of the comments here. 1985 was due to Dance Mix 1995 on CD. Whatever enthusiasm it takes. Welcome, Redis, being another member of the channel over here. Steve says, time for that Dell, step bro. Yeah, I was a little bit of a dumb butt. I uninstalled over the weekend like 3 Wi-Fi access points I have in the house. I usually have 5. I'm down to 2 right now. So yeah, that was my oopsies. Mostly because they're old and I'm upgrading them, but I didn't install the upgraded part yet. And then I'm like, let's have this great idea of going live. Anyway, okay, well, so look at this. A lot of people on Twitter are showing the explosion in consumer loans and the end of the student loan pause. Okay, first of all, let's make this very clear. Guess what people paid before the pandemic? Okay, think about that for a moment. What did people pay before the pandemic? I'll give you a moment to think about it. Okay, their debts. They paid their student loans. Oh my God, radical idea. Holy crap, people paid their student loans? And what did we not have? A recession. Maybe because students are kind of brokies anyway. It's unfortunate, this is true. I don't know that this idea that, oh yeah, with certainty, once people have to pay their student loans again, the economy's screwed, is probably just as strong of an argument as people were making. Or like, oh well, just wait, as soon as China reopens, every commodity is going to go to the moon and we're gonna have another wave of inflation. And I'm like, okay dude, just like we had all that inflation last time China's economy was open. What happened? China's economy opens up, everything's fine. Like, sorry, that's not a good way to drill fear. Now, this other idea we could look up. We could go St. Louis Fred, household spend, debt service payments, disposable income. So all we have to do is pull up a chart of what's going on with household debt service payments as a percentage of personal income. So I'm gonna grab that chart, and then we can also grab consumer debt service payments as a percentage of personal income. And we can go all the way to Q4 2022 on this data. We'll pull this data up on screen in just a moment here. Let's go ahead and run this over to the iPad. And then we can look at some of the data, because I think it's going to give us a good indicator of what we want to pay attention to. And it's not that the nominal number of debt is going up. I think that's something that a lot of people really miss. It's sort of like, and look, I get it. I said it too. You've heard me say, and it's true. Oh, this banking crisis is already larger than the banking crisis of 2008. Well, yeah, but, the dollar, we've had a lot of inflation since then, okay? I'm not saying that there hasn't been a lot of inflation. I'm definitely saying that. And I'm not saying that's a good thing. I'm saying it is problematic. It is a problem. But what's crazy is when we remember that nominal numbers matter. When we bailed out the economy in COVID with trillions of dollars, and the bailout, what was TARP, like 1.2? And I think we were like $6 trillion in COVID. It's a crazy difference in terms of the numbers. But anyway, so take a look at these numbers here. We'll pull this up. Let's see here. We're going to go here. So what do you have here on screen? You have household debt service payments as a percentage of personal disposable income. And what you have here is really an indication that we're nowhere near to the levels that we saw in 2007 or 8. In 2007 and 8, we were around 13%, up to 13%. Right now, we're all the way down there at the bottom right at 9.7%. So in other words, 9.7%. That's how much money we're spending on debt as a percentage of our disposable income. Now, if we jump on over, this is household debt service payments, right? Then you jump on over here to consumer debt service payments. Okay, so this one's a little higher, right? In fairness, it's a little higher. Oh, but wait a minute. It's just on par with what we saw in 2017, 18, and 19, and it's actually a fraction of what it was in the mid-2000s. In the mid-2000s, you were sitting around 6%. Early 2000s, you were knocking on the door of 7%. And we're down over here at 5.7%. I know the numbers don't sound like they're that horribly far off, but when you look on the chart, you can see we're not seeing any kind of like explosion or runaway of something that's horribly concerning. So yes, on a nominal value, debts are going up. People are taking on more loans. I get it. But people are also making more money. So this idea that, oh, but people, I mean, Max, you're right to bring this up. I actually think it's great you bring it up. So thank you. I'm not saying you're wrong. I think it's great you bring this up because it's good to address the issue. But this idea of people on Twitter complaining about the explosion of student loans or the explosion of consumer loans and the end of the student loan pause, I hate to say it, but that's absolutely what I despise about Twitter, is the level of depth you get on Twitter is zero. Because it's just, what's the sexy, like, provocative chart that you could throw up on screen, and it's debt's going up, roar! And that gets likes and shares and retweets. Now, don't get me wrong, there's some really cool things about Twitter. I don't want to poop on Twitter that much because I do like Twitter. But that's one of the things that grinds my gears, is that the level of depth on Twitter is like negative, man. It's because it's almost like, I think people who really do well on Twitter, they have to look for those charts that evoke a lot of emotion. And rather than, potentially argue why that chart is actually, why you have to adjust the chart to be relevant to our times today, it's so much easier to just go way up. And then everybody's like, oh, that can't be good. It's like Kevin McCarthy on Fox News. We spent too much money on our credit card. It's like we gave a teenager the credit card and we spent too much money and now we gotta rein in the budget because we're in tough times. It's like, oh, okay. I mean, the government is different from a household in many regards. Most of the fact that we could print our money and inflate our money away, and technically we never have to repay our debt as long as the economy grows stronger. That's not to argue that we shouldn't have a balanced budget. We should. Our government's highly failed at that, and they're highly inefficient at spending money. But the point is, there's a lot more than making a simple analogy that goes into the complexity of a situation. And every time I look at these bear arguments, I'm like, I don't see it. I don't see it. That's not that scary. And to me, that's what makes me, dare I say the B word, but it's true. It's what makes me bullish. There was this guy on Twitter. Oh, who was he? There was this dude on Twitter. He had this long rant, and he's like a super bear. And so this super bear is on Twitter, and he puts together this chart. I think it was the Credit Impulse. That's what it was. It was the chart on Credit Impulse. So he puts up a chart on Credit Impulse, and I tried to recreate his chart, and I couldn't do it. And so I tweeted at him, and I'm like, bro, I can't recreate your chart. How did you make this? Did you rig the data? Because the only way I could remotely and potentially get a chart that looks like yours is if I rig the data. And then I get something that looks like what you did. maybe I missed something here. Can you just like help me understand how you made your bear chart? And never replied. Never replied. Just never brought it up again. Never brought up Credit Impulse again. Just totally ignored it. It's like, okay, fine, but like, why? Why do the Bears have to resort to that? You know, it's like Mike Wilson. The more frustrated he gets that the Bear case isn't playing out for him, the more he starts talking about nonsense like, oh, the economy and the stock market are, you know, they're in thin air. They're climbing Mount Everest, and it's thin air up there. They're gonna suffocate eventually. But we just looked at consumer data, and it's like, it's not that bad. And then you get these other people again on Twitter, and they're like, but Kevin, have you seen the PE ratios of all these companies? This is clown world. And then I look and I go, bro, you're using 2022 numbers. And when you use 2022 numbers, especially of the tech industry, when the earnings were in the hole because you're comparing to 2021, we know the chip companies had a nasty earnings recession. That's already behind us. That's why Nvidia went to $120 because of the earnings recession. And so you're going to use trailing 12-month EPS to tell me what the PE ratio is and to somehow suggest that we're in clown world today because you're using EPS from the hole? Like, who's the clown? Like, use realistic data. It's whatever. But I don't know. I don't know. Maybe, just maybe, Kevin has rose-colored glasses on. No, I really do my best every day to try to see what the bear argument is, what I'm potentially missing. But I'll tell you, so far, this idea of whether or not we have a 1995 recovery or not, it really feels a lot like we are actually on the Nike swoosh recovery. And I'm very optimistic about it. I'm very optimistic about buying real estate later this year. I'm very optimistic about being in stocks, and I'm very optimistic about these courses, and especially the AI release coming out on June 1st.